Hello everybody and welcome back to another Future of the Fortress post read-along. If you've missed these in the past, they're pretty simple. It's me reading through the monthly Q&A by Tarn on the Bay 12 forums. This is something that the community of Dwarf Fortress has been doing for a very long time. It's more of a community brainstorming session where Tarn answers questions from people in the community, sometimes about the current state of the game, sometimes about future developments, and sometimes about nitty-gritty programming details. This is a very long one, and the reason this one is very long is because Tarn missed a month because the forums were down and then things just got really busy, and then this one was even late after the fact. So now I'm being very late uploading this because of how long it is. I'm actually recording this after editing because, to be honest with you, this one has taken me 3 recording sessions. It is 55 screenshots worth of questions, which is way longer than they tend to be, and I even left some out. So if you'd like to take part in these conversations, there's a link to the forum thread down below, and you can read the few questions that I did leave out, and also the entirety of the post as a whole. If you have an account on the Bay 12 forums, you too can leave questions and Tarn will answer them. So, before we dive in, there is one more thing I would like to mention, which is the music that you are going to be hearing in the background is the one released track for Adventure Mode released by Dabu, composed in part by Dabu and Simon, the original Dwarf Fortress fan soundtrack creator. The track is called Beyond the Gates, and there is a link to it in the description of this video. Let's dive in. The first question comes in from Volleylol, and they ask, will there be non-player demigod characters? Like, will they show up in Legends as the children of whatever god and influence the world? And Tarn's response is, yeah, this was the hope. Once it's complete, it's a good way for us to introduce new people for Fort Mode, new companions and adversaries, and others in Adventure Mode as well. Should be good fun, but won't be in immediately in April. The next question is worded very strangely and comes in from Zisudra, and their question word for word is, how much are the other controls changing and are any of the current ones are merging? But what they mean by this is they're talking about Adventure Mode controls, specifically hotkeys. So how many of the keys are changing for Adventure Mode, and are the current ones being merged into a new control scheme, or are things staying the same? And Tarn's response is, we've kept most of the current keys. I don't remember any counterexamples on the top of my head. Since we're not using WASD, the keys weren't exploded like they were in Fort Mode, so most everything could remain intact. The next one's a bit of a long one, but we'll read it, and it comes in from Inevitable Demon Mom, and they say, hello. I watched Blind's recent video on what to expect from Adventure Mode and magic healing, and I got very interested in the latter part. While at first I was very unsure of implementing a sort of magical healing that could revert some otherwise permanent injuries, I started to think about what would be an interesting implementation that could fall in line with the feel of DF. So this got me thinking, is this new way of healing conceptualized like mage casting a spell on an injured person, or more like an alchemist or traditional healer rubbing a combination of weeds and other materials on the injury? Will the new healing method serve as a single multi-purpose heal-it-all solution, or will there be specifically, hopefully randomized for each world, requirements and quirks for each sort of injury? For example, if you are trying to heal torn ligaments, the material or other requirements are somewhat different from if you're trying to heal nerve damage. In this case, will there be different recipes for these different kinds of healing? Will scholars in Fortress Mode be able to discover these recipes by doing research and discussing with other smart pants who come and visit your fort? How viable are you planning to make having an adventurer be dedicated to medicine? It would be very cool to have yet another different niche to specialize in the coming Adventure Mode. And Tarn's response is, yeah, it's certainly going to be randomized on a per-world basis. The particulars are just going to come in over time. There will probably be some powerful effects in the beginning, and then it'll become diversified, with some weaker stuff as we spend time with it. Relating it to scholarship in Fort Mode is a myth and magic goal, but that won't happen at first, and hospitals won't see anything for a bit. But eventually, they'll notice the new possibilities. Integrating Fort Mode generally with magic is exciting and challenging, and right in front of us. For dedicated medical adventurers who aren't just party members helping out, I see the basic issue there just being that there aren't a lot of randomly wounded and sick people out in the world. Naturally, we'd like to make life miserable for everybody randomly. but that'll take some doing. Next one comes in from frequent commenter on the show, Salvadaddy, and they say, "Hello, Toady. Have you come up with any new monsters or creatures randomly as you've been working on the adventure mode stuff?" And Tarn's response is, "Nothing new yet. It has mainly been interface and graphics and audio. We aren't even caught up with all of the existing features, but there will be something to play, as seen in the combat video, and the new monsters should start coming as we go through our demigod, dungeon, and temple roadmap. This won't be complete in April's beta either, but will be coming in as the update comes out of beta." The next question comes in from Volilol, and they say, "When the biomes become sphere-aligned primarily, instead of being good, evil, and wild, what are your thoughts on the surroundings descriptor, i.e. calm, haunted, joyous wilds, etc. on the embark screen? Some sphere alignments, like Land of Thunder, don't map clearly to any of the existing descriptions. But at the same time, having descriptions for all spheres or combinations of spheres seems like it could be a lot, both to develop, but also for the player embarking. Example, if a biome is rumbling or chaotic, how difficult is that?" And Tarn's response is, "These adjectives are particularly linked to 3 existing properties, so I imagine they'll get exploded. Musical timbre is an example of us kind of going expansive with a collection of adjectives along a bunch of related axes. And something similar could happen. I'm not sure adjectives will be sufficient though. Hopefully places will be interesting enough eventually to describe with a sentence or two." A question comes in from The Marmot, probably the marmot that chased me the last time I hiked up Garibaldi Mountain, and they say, "Will alive demigods influence the name of the age? Vampires and necromancers already influence it, along with the werebeasts and other creatures." And Tarn's response is, "I'm not sure if we'll get to tweaks to age names here before they undergo a more serious change." The next one here is a multi-parter, so I've split it up for your convenience. So I won't be reading their name post the first one, but I will be swapping back and forth between the questions and Tarn's responses. So this comes in from DPH Kraken, and they say, "The portraits look like they're set up to automatically apply the 100 or so raw colors for worn items and eyes, but I haven't seen them applied to any previews. Will there be palette support for the layered graphics? Any new uses for palettes planned, like doing unit-colored clothing as a paletted graphic?" And Tarn's response is, "Yeah, that's in now. Generally, you can define multiple custom palettes to use for it, and also use the default one." Part 2 of their question is, "Adventure crafting is minimal without modded reactions, and thus end up running into unexpected limitations. Is it likely we will see any bug fixes for typical reaction pitfalls, like unwearable gloves, or unstacked, dimensioned reagents, bones, bars, globs, etc. in the April update?" And Tarn's response to part 2 is, "No, not for the April update, but April isn't the full update. I'm not sure how things are going to go as we head for the full release. There's going to be a lot coming at me." The next question comes in from Spatula66, and they say, "Will human, elven, and goblin civilizations be given hairstyling options now that we're getting procedural portraits? Also, why don't elf sprites show their facial hair, and goblin sprites don't show their hair or facial hair? I did notice, though, that the goblin portrait examples showed hair, but not beards, and elves and goblins do have beards, so the sprites should probably show that." And Tarn's response is, "I've added hairstyles for humans and elves. Goblins are in an odd position since we have hair, but they don't follow the existing styles, so everybody is still bald. No idea about elf beards. We have one drawn, but no style images for it. Though I think elves will style them now in text." The next question comes in from Saharo, and they say, "Any plans to make water a continuous requirement for farming and other crafts? Several Dwarf Fortress crafts depend on their real-life counterparts on having water. Farming, brewing, cooking, dyeing, smithing, and breeding. And I'm sure that I'm missing some. While Dwarf Fortress irrigation is used to create farmable soil, farmers don't water their plants. What they mean by irrigation is pouring water onto stone, which creates mud, which you can farm on. Now, Tarn quotes several other users' responses, so I will read Eric Blank's first, and they say, I know water for brewing has been asked about before, and I think the response was that it probably will be needed in the future. There was some bugs buckets that needed fixing first, among other things. World Gen forts also don't always have access to water, but they can import products from Helix which do, which was another aspect which player forts need to be able to do as well. Found Helixes nearby or import-export directly from your outlying settlements. Tarn then quotes Patrick Lundell, and I will read their response now. Toady also mentioned a desire to overhaul farming in the past, and I assume that's still on the table. However, I don't think it's ever been in the realm of scheduled changes. Example, it's in the realm of stuff they'd want to do at some time in the future. And Tarn's response is, these replies handled this. We certainly want water to be used in some more places. Using it absolutely everywhere might be too much. Just in the terms of the amount of moving about or little cisterns or whatever that would need to be kept to keep the fort running. But adding a water requirement to several jobs would be fun, I think. We might need some more water gathering methods before we jump too far into that though, to keep more biomes viable. The next one comes in from Urist McSaddist, and they say, do you plan attempting an in-fort market economy again in the foreseeable future? And Tarn's response is, sure, but I have no idea when. So this is Pilbo quoting another comment, so it's a little hard to read, but I will do my best to decipher it. And they say, I was looking into why buoyancy isn't a thing in the game, and I haven't been able to find a post from you about the subject since August 2007. And this is the post that they found. The new fluids invalidated most of the old code. Have water stop you when you jump into it so you don't go all the way down to the bottom is linked to density, sink and float stuff, which I haven't done yet. I'm not sure what I'll get to. It'll either be done or get retconned. And Pilbo continues after the quoted comment. Other than that, I saw lots of people make various comments about buoyancy being too hard, or implying you don't want to implement it for some reason. But it's kind of hard to tell what is assumption, speculation, or accurate. So what's the deal with buoyancy and airplane food? And why hasn't it been included yet? If it's a technical issue, what are the major problems? Is it going to wait for boats? And Tarn quotes a forum response from Caldifer, so I will read their response first about buoyancy, and they say, generally, Dwarf Fortress development follows feature sets related to some kind of player interactivity. Since there haven't been any features relating to buoyancy, it hasn't been touched. Boats are definitely going to require it, so expect a possibly excessively detailed buoyancy simulation at the time. Doing things this way means that every system gets created purposefully, reducing the chances that something needs to be repeatedly replaced. This does have the unfortunate effect of the simulation being perpetually somewhat lopsided, with seemingly obvious features absent. Looking at the development outline, I'm like 95% sure boats, air quotes, is going to be the thing that triggers some kind of huge fluid rewrite, and oceans of beer, and hot air balloons, and whatever other semi-related features would then be on the table. And Tarn's response is, yeah, it just hasn't come up strongly yet, as Caldifer says, although I'm sure that there'd be a few funny side effects currently, as with water pressure. I'm definitely pro-buoyancy, and I imagine it'll come up with boats. Yeah, though things are so stark, we'll have to be careful. It seems unavoidable that it'll be the situation that adding a single coin to a boat at some tipping point will cause it to sink one tile deeper, suddenly flooding the entire ship and sinking it. It'll have to warn you about that. But if a dragon gets on board and the boat is all on fire and also sinks, that would be amusing. The next question comes in from Diganob, and they say, will caste requirements for different jobs and positions be introduced to civilizations at some point? This could have a lot of potential for modding, specifically. For instance, an insectoid civilization, which has worker miners and soldier soldiers, or an Amazonian kingdom which only allows females into the military and positions of power. I know this wouldn't be top priority, but is it on the easier side of things, or is it relegated to the far future, if at all planned? And Tarn's response is, yeah, it would be great if ant people worked correctly, or were done at all, in any way. This had always been sitting out at the entity rewrite, when we could start respecting more types of civilizations. Now that arcs are gone, it's more about the general vibe of how magic stuff unfolds. It'll take a while for us to see how it's going to be. The next question comes in from Frankville, and they say, a few days ago, I began to imagine what would happen if Dwarf Fortress included the concept of evolution. Ancient bones prove that dwarfs descended from the orangutan, and things like that. It doesn't seem crazy given that DF aspires to be a very complete world simulator, but I see it as logical you have not considered it because it is not something that is usually dealt with in the fantasy genre. Have you ever thought of the possibility of treating evolution? If so, what reasons led you to rule it out? Are there other similar things that you have considered and definitely ruled out for compelling reasons, such as technical complexity or time limitations? And Tarn's response is, oh sure, we've thought about it, because we like critters. And there are several obstacles, of course. We'd need a better genetic model, and a better creature definition that can float some more. And of course, in pre-world gen and beyond, it need to model selection and mutation, and that's a whole giant can of worms. But there are little bits of it sitting around, like our terrible half-baked genetics stuff, and the virtually unused breed concept that can handle appearance changes, etc. It would be cool to get into different types of cats and dogs, and then expand that outwards, for instance. A question comes in from A Curious Cat, and they say, I was watching that interview from Blind IRL, and Tarn was talking about weaponizing the dew. Does that mean there's going to be a product placement with PepsiCo? And Tarn's response is, we'd have to say no, but also have not been approached. But once we have proper non-water and magma fluids, I'm sure that the dew mod would be the least of our worries. The next is another multi-parter, so I'm going to run this one the same way as the previous one, and it comes in from Bratok, and they say, when will the map export function from Legends mode be available? And Tarn's response is, I'm not sure, but it wants to come back. In terms of missing old features, Adventure mode is the higher priority, but missing bits of Legends mode are not forgotten. The second part of their question is, will there be updates regarding NPCs and their social component? For example, I noticed such a thing that characters can serve in the same unit for many years and still remain strangers to each other. Or after a battle, the wounded are simply abandoned. And first of all, everyone goes to get a drink in the bar. In general, the behavior of the characters in some places is not entirely logical, and I would like to know if you are planning any updates in that regard. I would just like to interject here and state that I would try making your military doctors. If you have them set to doctors, or at the very least orderlies priority jobs, and like rescuing wounded citizens, when you take them off duty, I've had them rescue each other. So it's a matter of how you set up your medical stuff. But let's see Tarn's response. And he says, lackluster and or inevitably negligent childcare is a frequent complaint. We're all forgetting to this stuff. It has tended to get better over time. The next question comes in from Ear, and they say, historically, you've played roguelike games, where your score was tallied at the end of the game. Would a numeric representation of score fit in adventure mode? And Tarn's response is, the original conception of Dwarf Fortress had adventure mode high score, of course, but it's expanded out beyond that now. We've thought periodically about things like some sort of arena-type submode with contained map generation that could be good for us testing algorithms, but also provide a space for a quick dungeon dive. Scores could fit there, but even in that case, the heavily procedural element gives scores a dubious meaning. It is possible, though. The next question comes in from Lan, and they say, when it comes to healing methods you're implementing with the adventure mode release, how varied are they? Like, is it just a difference in ingredients, or are they going to distinguish between ingested and topical potions? And will healing sometimes have negative consequences? Also, when you referred to killing the big weight, dead, does that mean updates are going to be bringing features that would have otherwise been separated into arcs into the game independently of those arcs, or are those arcs still going to be a thing? But we'll see features of those arcs rolled out bit by bit. Finally, will there be an option to auto-generate an adventure mode character? And Tarn's response is, at first we'll probably be guided by existing implementation, which makes ingested and spell-like interaction more likely to start. Of course, the game gets more interesting when you can just place whatever substance on yourself, and we already have the system for that. So that's an avenue that's not too hard to take. I think it's inevitable that we'll still focus on things for periods of time, but we're trying not to make those periods 26 months. But I think we'll see a greater mixture of types of features with version control. I think we'll also see some features baking for longer and then suddenly appearing, regardless of what sort of features have been trickling in at the time. There's no auto-generate option yet, though I was thinking about that this morning, since it really is quite a lot of work to make characters and we already have something similar in Fort mode. But it won't be there initially. It would be cool to just be like, spin me up a 4-character party, and it gives you a varied group to approve. The next one is a multi-parter coming in from Vailwin, and they say, I've been doing some research on the Dwarf Fortress wiki in preparation for the release and came across a list of power goals. It was interesting to read. I understand that list is quite old and no longer up to date, but do these power goals still reflect your long-term vision of the game? And Tarn's response is, yeah, I'd argue they were always very weird. Maybe a little weirder than the game was going to attain. But it's still not a terrible list, mostly. And the second part of their multi-parter is, more specifically, one of these goals mentioned the possibility for live adventurer to have a wife, children, and to play their heir after death or retirement. It would lead to some amazing stories. Is this a feature that's still planned? And Tarn's response is, yeah. Relationships and families is definitely still a goal. I can't wait for your spouse to be like, it was inevitable, or some pure half-authored, half-proc cringe, and it'll be great. The next one is quite a long one, which comes in from Shirakage, and they say, will chopped off limbs have different sprites instead of the classic flesh and bone sprites? Additionally, will we see visible injuries in characters' sprites without looking at the portraits? Seeing missing arms or legs would be cool, and minimal injuries wouldn't be shown at all or shown as a single red dot on the sprite. Also, when I was looking at the characters on the wiki, I noticed that Nightwings don't have tails, even though the dwarves like them for their long tails. I think the error is occurred because one and only Nightwing drawing has no tail, and apparently they have tail part in the combat menu. Is this going to be fixed? About Myth and Magic update. We know that some of the myths create cursed races. In one myth, goblins were cursed dwarves because dwarves destroyed some object and the god cursed 1/3 of them and turned them into goblins. So this changes will be seen in the game too. For example, in that world, dwarves call goblins Cursed One, or various things, and goblins blame them, etc. About procedural dragons, will they come soon, or are you waiting for magic to implement them into the game? If I remember correctly, procedural dragons were about this one will breathe ice, and this one will breathe fire, etc. But with the magic system, they will be intelligent, talk, and use magic? And Tardan's rather lengthy response is, missing arms and legs and sprites for the layered creatures, dwarves, humans, etc., are just a matter of data entry at this point. Better chopped off limbs would be cool, but we haven't drawn anything. And I remember in my combat video looking around for the severed parts. Could have had a dedicated sprite. Always more to do. And I wonder how they have a tail in the combat menu if they don't have a tail. Anyway, it's better when things are consistent. I'm not sure when we get to it in regards to fixing Nightwing's sprite. And this is the hope. It'll lag behind the technical implementation since it has to start there, in reference to the cursed ones and goblins, etc. And as far as procedural dragons go, procedural dragons were about implementing the text file format, so I imagine this could wait to see how any scripting changes work out. We are hoping to experiment with that at some point. The next question comes in from Falk, and they say, or maybe it's FalCC. I have no idea. Let me know in the comments. If you assign some artifact gear from your fort to adventure mode characters in your military, and then return to adventure mode, is there any sort of transfer of ownership? Will anyone show up to look for it from your fort civilization in play? Or are they cool with it, as long as you're bringing glory and death with your indestructible leather pants? What if you sign up under another leader or found a faction in the wilderness? Will anybody come to press that claim for your old citizens? Is there any different kind of response if the artifact was gifted to the fort versus someone's family heirloom? For that matter, are there any plans for dwarves whose family artifacts have been traded away or other civilizations to start scheming for their own illicit recovery? And Tarn's response is, I think all fort mode assignments retain the equipment as community property, with the player freely able to unassign, so the all artifact claims would still be on that basis if you start playing again. It would require a more explicit gift system, or you could appoint the adventurer to a position and then make the artifact a symbol, maybe. I don't recall off the top of my head if anybody pursues artifact claims now but villains. There could be a quest to get it back if it's marked as lost, but I don't recall if NPCs take those up, even in World Gen. There was some work in that direction, but I don't remember how far it went. The gift and heirloom status does matter generally. Factions only set up quests, etc. for stuff that belongs to them, rather than an individual citizen. If the individual citizen gets villain status, they'll also try to get their artifact back in certain contexts, like in the artifact heist, and also in World Gen, but I don't think it made it to adventure mode. This was all a part of the delayed villain stuff, which is now fair to pursue in the near term, of course. Once the beta dust is settled and the full basic adventure update is out, finishing the elements of villains and release means all the artifact pursuit questions being answered in the affirmative, I think. Artifact movement and claims and grabbing was a simple traditional glue to hold a lot of it together, but we got delayed. Now we are arriving back with all the army and magic stuff, etc. mixed in. And the final question for this month's Q&A comes in from Kontako, and they say, is the current cordial of intelligent undead and experiments by the living aligned and red-blooded as intended, or will they begin to be expelled by societies with particular ethics? In the continuation of the villain's work, is there a difference in how demigod characters will play and be treated if their patron is the target of a non-reformed or reformed religion, i.e. without organized temples and priests? Are there no item retrieval missions if a demigod character is created at year 1 due to no relics having been yet created in World Gen history? Or might there be new collectibles? And Tarn's response is, yeah, we have some relevant ethics, so it should come up. Handling the social side of things broadly has always been a part of myth and magic. And it's certainly a little weird now for everybody to be so chill with living dead, especially. Experiments are also pretty terrifying, though in a world with various animal people, it all kind of goes together. But some humans should be afraid of animal people too, at first, probably, depending on how the world is. Once we get to implementing the temple and relic quests, it'll likely make a difference. Yeah, at first there won't be one. There are likely to be some additional primordial options along the lines of the existing Titan shrines and vaults, since those are pretty rough. And that brings us to the end of this month's Future of the Fortress. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a like on it. If you have things that you would like to say to me or about this episode or this series in general, please leave a comment as well. And if you would like to take part in these conversations, as always, please go to the Bay12 forums, make an account, and maybe you'll show up on this show. If you enjoy the work that I do, well, Adventure Mode is out in beta in a few days, and hopefully this gave you even more information about it. So if you're interested in what I do and would like to hang out while I do my work live, you can check that out over at twitch.tv/BLINDIRL or on this very YouTube channel. We do stream on this YouTube channel, but I don't read the chat as much as I do on Twitch. Thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourselves. Touch grass once in a while, and I hope to see you in the next one.